You are 17 years old and you are selling chai outside Andheri station when the man from the casting agency hands you a slip of paper. You don't think much of it. You've seen these slips before. Your cousin took one 3 years ago and came back from the audition with nothing but bus fare spent and a bruised ego. But your hands are cracked from the winter cold, and the chai stall belongs to your uncle, not you. And something about the way the man says you have a face makes you hold the paper carefully instead of dropping it in the gutter. You go. Not because you believe it, because the alternative is the stall, forever. And you are 17 and that particular forever feels unbearable. The audition is a cattle call. 200 boys in a corridor that smells of hair oil and desperation. You are called in, you stand. Under a light, you say 3 lines from a scene you memorized on the train, and you go home. You assume that is the end. But 4 days later your phone, a scratched Nokia your father gave you before he left for Gulf, rings with a Mumbai number, and a woman tells you that you've been selected for a background role in a film starring someone whose poster you have on your wall. The pay is 600 rupees for a 12-hour day. You say yes before she finishes the sentence. This is where it begins. Not with applause, not with a spotlight. With you standing in the background of a wedding scene in 40-degree heat, wearing a sherwani that belongs to the costume department and is 3 sizes too large, told to clap and look festive for 7 hours while the hero, the real one, the one whose poster is on your wall, shoots his close-ups over and over again from angles you will spend the next decade trying to understand. You are furniture. You know it. You do it anyway, because the 600 rupees is real and the alternative is your uncle's stall, and because somewhere in those 7 hours, you stop watching the crowd and start watching the director. The director is a small man with a large voice, and he moves around the set like he owns the air in the room, which in a way he does, and you watch how he looks at things, not at the hero, but just past the hero, at the geometry of where 2 people stand, in relation to each other, at the negative space between a raised hand and a face. You don't have language for this yet. You just know that this man is doing something that interests you more than anything your school ever asked you to care about, and that observation, that quiet theft of someone else's craft, is the first real decision you make in this industry, even if it doesn't look like a decision at all. You do background work for 2 years. 200 rupees here, 600 there. Sometimes nothing because a shoot gets canceled and nobody calls to tell you. You learn how a set works from the bottom, which means you learn what everyone ignores. The light boys, the spot boys, the continuity girl who watches everything through narrowed eyes, the assistant directors who are exhausted and underpaid and will one day either quit or run the industry. You make yourself useful in ways that are not your job. You carry cables, you remember shot lists, you tell an AD when a prop has moved between takes because you were watching when no one else was. These small things compound. They don't make you famous. They make you known, which is different and in the beginning, more useful. A small role comes when you are 19. 12 lines, a scene in a courtroom drama, a character whose name is simply Constable. You prepare for it like it is the role of your life because at that moment it is, and you say your 12 lines so cleanly, so without the self-consciousness that kills most newcomers on camera, that the director uses the first take and the cinematographer, an older man with a silver beard and a reputation for being difficult, looks up from his monitor and nods at you. That nod costs him nothing. It means everything. You file it away like currency. By the time you are 22, you have a face that casting agents recognize and a name they can't quite place, which is the most dangerous zone in this industry. Familiar enough to be called, unknown enough to be forgotten. You book a supporting role in a mid-budget thriller, the kind of film that gets reviewed in 3 newspapers and then disappears. But your performance is noticed in one of those reviews, a single sentence, the standout in a crowded cast, and you screenshot it and send it to your mother and she prints it and puts it on the wall next to the tube light in her kitchen. You don't tell her that one review in a forgettable film doesn't change anything. You let her have it. You need her to have it because you are not sure yet if you believe any of this yourself. The moral test comes earlier than you expect. You are 23 and a producer with money and no taste wants to cast you in a film that is, in every way, you can assess it, garbage. A loud, offensive comedy that will almost certainly release and almost certainly make money and almost certainly define how the industry sees you for the next 5 years. The role pays more than you have earned in the previous 2 years combined. Your rent is 3 months overdue. Your mother needs a procedure that is not expensive by the standards of people with money and is impossible by the standards of yours. You take the film. You do not tell yourself it is art. You tell yourself it is strategy, which is its own kind of lie but a more functional one. The film releases, makes money, and you are in it playing a buffoon with a comedy accent. And for 6 months after, every audition you walk into, someone makes a joke about the accent. You smile. You wait. You do not confuse a setback for a verdict, the eye. Real shift happens at 26. A director, serious, festival circuit, the kind who talks about cinema with an intensity that would be insufferable if the films weren't so good, casts you in a role that requires you to play a man unraveling. Across 3 hours of screen time, you are not his first choice. You are his fourth. The first 3 dropped out for reasons involving schedules and star math and the complicated economics of who is worth what to whom at any given moment. And you are handed the script on a Tuesday and told rehearsals start Thursday, and you spend Wednesday reading it 4 times in a row and understanding, with a clarity that feels almost physical, that this is the thing you've been preparing for, without knowing you were preparing for it. The film is released at a festival, then it releases nationally. Then it is discussed, and you are discussed inside that discussion, and the quality of the attention changes. It becomes the kind that asks questions about you instead of just placing you in a category. You are now what the industry calls a name. This sounds simple. It is not. Being a name means that you are visible enough to be a target, established enough to have something to lose, and not yet powerful enough to fully protect what you have. You begin to understand that every film is a bet placed with your own credibility as the stake. A bad film now doesn't just mean a bad film. It means a revision of what people think you are, a renegotiation of the category they've put you in, and categories in this industry are prisons with comfortable furniture. You start to say no to things, which sounds like power and costs like power too, because every no is a door you are choosing not to open, and you cannot always see what's behind it. At 28, you have an argument with a studio head in a room with expensive art on the walls and no windows. The kind of room that has been designed to make you feel small, and you hold your position on a script change that matters to you and leave without the deal. And on the ride home you sit with the specific anxiety of someone who has chosen principle over money and is not certain the principle was worth it. 3 months later, the film releases with the other actor and is a disaster, and you feel something that is not quite relief and not quite vindication, and you file that feeling too. Because the industry will test you again, and the memory of having survived one test is the only currency that travels forward. The 30s bring a different kind of pressure. You are 31 and you are bankable, which is a word that is about money and sounds like a compliment and functions like a leash. Studios want you for things that will make money. The things that will make money are not always the things that will make you better. You negotiate constantly, not just fees, which are numbers and therefore simple, but creative control, script approval, director choice, the invisible architecture of what a film actually becomes when it is made by people with competing interests and finite time. You make 3 films in 2 years that are commercially successful and critically moderate, and you are aware that you are building a career that is stable and a creative life that is not, and you are trying to hold both things at once without dropping either. The first real failure comes at 33. A big film, a 100 crore production, a director you believed in, a story you thought was important. The film releases and the audience does not come, and the reviews are polite in the way reviews are when they are trying not to be cruel, and you sit with the numbers and the silence and the specific loneliness of having worked 18 months on something that has ceased to matter to anyone but you. People say it happens to everyone, and you know they mean it as comfort, and you accept it as comfort and still spend 3 weeks in a state that is not depression and is not fine and doesn't have a useful name. What you do with it is this. You go back to the footage. You watch your own performance without the story around it, just the acting, just the choices you made from moment to moment, and you find things you would do differently and things you would do exactly the same, and you write them down in a notebook, and you close the notebook and you start the next thing. Because there is always a next thing. This is the part no one tells you when they hand you that slip of paper outside Andheri station. That the industry's appetite is constant and impersonal, that it will consume your successes and your failures with equal indifference. That the only way to stay in it is to keep feeding it and to maintain, somewhere inside the feeding, a private version of yourself that belongs to no one's marketing strategy. You are 35 now, and you know this. You know the difference between the version of you that exists in interviews and the version that reads scripts at 2 in the morning with a cup of tea and no performance for anyone's benefit. The gap between those two versions is where you actually live. The industry has changed around you. Streaming has arrived and reordered everything. The math of what a hit means, the geography of who gets to see something, the timeline in which a career can be built or destroyed. Actors who might have spent 15 years as you did, accumulating slowly, are now being discovered in 6 months through a series that reaches everywhere at once. You feel about this the way you feel about most things that threaten to be unjust. Not with anger, because anger is a resource you have learned to spend carefully, but with attention. You adapt. You do a streaming project that the old version of you might have considered beneath a theatrical career, and it reaches 40 million viewers in a month. And you understand that the containers for storytelling have changed, but the storytelling itself has not, and that this is the one thing worth protecting. At 37, a journalist asks you in an interview what it feels like to have made it, and you pause for a long time before answering, long enough that she shifts. In her chair, and what you are thinking but do not say, is that the question assumes an arrival that you have not experienced and do not expect to experience. What you say instead is that the feeling you were chasing at 17, not fame, not money, but the specific sensation of doing the thing exactly right, of a scene landing the way it was supposed to land, of watching playback and recognizing something true. That feeling is as rare and as difficult to produce now as it was in the beginning, and that this is either the tragedy of the work or the reason to keep doing it. And most days you are not sure which. The journalist writes this down. It becomes the pull quote. You see it later on a magazine cover above a photograph of yourself that looks nothing like the boy outside Andheri station, and exactly like the person who was always waiting inside, him. But the work does not pause for reflection. There is a film in pre-production that scares you, which is the surest sign you should do it. There is a director half your age, who has sent you a script that asks things of you that you do not know yet if you can give. There is a conversation with your producer about whether the budget is enough and a conversation with yourself about whether you are, and both conversations are unresolved and will remain unresolved until the camera rolls, which is where all the negotiating ends and the actual thing begins. You have been in this industry for 20 years. You have been a background extra and a constable and a buffoon and a revelation and a disappointment and a comeback and a statistic and an institution, sometimes in the same calendar year. You have learned that none of these categories are permanent and none of them are meaningless, and the only through line is the work itself, unreliable and essential, waiting for you every morning like a problem that cannot be solved but must be attempted. You lace up. You show up. The slate claps and the assistant director calls action and you step into the light, which is the oldest choice you have ever made and still the only one that feels entirely yours.